The music, music, the music. Good morning, everyone. Thanks for being here. I appreciate that. Dr. Alatorre, I'm just the guy who collaborated to put this conference together, and I'll be presenting the presenters, and the people are going to come and present for you guys. And with that say, I'm going to introduce to you Dr. Michael DeValve, and he's going to talk to you. Thanks, Michael.
Good morning. I'd like to just begin our time together with a brief, very short guided meditation. Take a few seconds to gather our breath. I'll read something for us, and then we'll just take a few more seconds to hold it before us and move forward. So I may invite you to be comfortable and find your center and just breathe in, breathe out. We gather today in the spirit of care, of determination, and of hope. Let us hold lamp-like before ourselves awareness of the reality of suffering from sexual assault, from racism, from exclusion, and the tribulations of youth, but also the wisdom to insist on the possibility of transforming hurt and brokenness into insight, wisdom, and healing. Let us also remember the unfolding nightmare in Baltimore, the continued nightmares in Haiti, Gaza, the Ukraine, and elsewhere. Let us remember, but without abandoning our shared commitment to tending pain in all forms, to transmuting wretchedness to celebrating life. Let us together now consecrate our time together in the names of all who have suffered. May we convene today mindfully and joyfully, and may we redouble our commitment to wise and nurturing justice.
So it's with great honor that I would like to present the Dean, Arnaa, to do the opening remarks for this conference.
Good morning. Welcome. I'm here, I think, basically, not only to say welcome, but I'd like to just draw attention to the enormous amount of work it took to pull this together. If we don't talk about problems, if we don't take apart those problems and look at how they affect people differently, we can't make anything better. And to put together a conference like this is an awful lot of work. And also keeps that group focused on things that are very difficult, but also people who are making a difference. So in that spirit, I say welcome and thank you for being here, and thank you very much to the Criminal Justice Department for making this available to all of us.
So our first presenter is Jasmine Grace. I met Jasmine about 2 years ago, exactly in this room. She was presenting, and I was so impressed that I went outside and bought her book. By the way, there's books outside that you can get too. Her story is really something that has inspired my students and inspired me through my research and to my teaching. So I just want to say thank you to Jasmine for coming and collaborating with the department, CJ. Thank you, Jasmine.
Thank you so much for inviting me, for having me here. I feel like you can't see me because I'm so short, but I guess I'm on the screen too, and so that's helpful. So yes, I'm Jasmine. I'm a survivor of the commercial sex trade, trafficking, and addiction, and I've been out of that life for about, I think, 17 years at this point. I have kids, I homeschool, I drive a minivan, make fun of myself. I have a few of my kids here with me today, the 12 and 6-year-old, because they don't go anywhere, right? They're always with me. So if you saw me on the street today, if you saw me in the grocery store, wherever, I just look like a regular mom, right? I look like a regular person. And that is really, truly due to the work that I've done in my recovery, due to my faith. I have a really strong Christian faith, and I've really pressed into that in order to get to where I am today. But where did the story start, right? We don't choose prostitution. We don't choose trafficking. That isn't something that we're excited to do. That's not something that any little girl dreams of becoming when she's little. I know my daughters don't dream of that. I know I didn't, no matter how dysfunctional we are, right? No matter what. And so when we think about trafficking, when we think about exploitation, we have to think about the whole story. And so are you guys familiar with the ACE score, Adverse Childhood Experience? Okay, great. And so when we think about ACEs, we think about how important that is and really how our childhood experiences shape us, right, into who we become, our identity, and so forth. So my ACE score isn't large. I mean, I work with women today who have ACE scores of 10. My ACE score is only a 4. And the reason why is because, number one, I wasn't sexually abused as a child. That is a huge factor in how mostly women get involved in the commercial sex trade. Do men, boys get involved in the trade? Absolutely. But the majority is female. And 80 to 90% of women who end up in the commercial sex trade have been sexually abused as children. Okay, so that dial's already been turned. And so me not being sexually abused, being raised in a home with severe dysfunction, my mom suffered severely with mental illness to the point where she wasn't really able to provide that care and nurture. What is our number one need as humans? Tell me, what is our number one need as humans? Love. Belonging, right? Connection, exactly. And when you don't receive that as a child, what ends up happening, right? You go look for it in all the other places. And for me, it was all the wrong places, unfortunately. And my dad worked a lot to provide for the family, so he was never around. He was a really hard worker. I'm obviously from the North Shore. You hear the accent. I'm from Saugus, Revere area. I'm Italian, so even worse, I talk with my hands, right? And I had a big Italian Catholic, crazy dysfunctional family on my mother's side, a lot of criminal activity, addiction, all types of things. And I grew up in that atmosphere, thought it was completely normal. But my father's parents were really kind and gentle, and I liked spending time there. And my papa was a big man, and he, give me a big bear hug. My nanny would tuck me in at night, read me bedtime stories when I would sleep over, took me to church on Sunday. We'd have macaroni and meatballs. We call it gravy. Am I the only Italian? Or does anyone else call it gravy? Oh, all right, I'm close to home. When I speak far away, no one knows what gravy is. I think it's brown. They know it's red. Anyway, right? So growing up like that with my big family, feeling that comfort and that love and that acceptance planted those seeds in there. But right, it wasn't enough to carry me through and give me tons of self-esteem. But I knew I never wanted to be a prostitute. And so time would go on. I would struggle. 12, 13, horrible age. I have a 12-year-old now. I know how difficult it is. I started spelling love, S-E-X, right? Because I didn't know. I thought that's what you were supposed to do. I thought that's how you got the boys to like you. And if I wasn't giving it, they were taking it, right? So I did experience sexual violence as a teen, but I wasn't able to process that. And I thought it was my fault. And so what does that do? It creates shame, right? And shame is the number one tool that keeps us sick, keeps us silent, and we keep kind of choosing the same path over and over again. And do you know that the average age into the commercial sex trade is between 12 and 14, right? So these young girls, again, mostly young girls are getting involved in the trade that young because the dial's been turned, because they have immense amount of vulnerabilities. Let's think about some of the things, what makes us super vulnerable as children. Number one, we're children, right? Our brains aren't fully developed. Number two, how about growing up in an abusive home and then you're put in the foster care system? Right? And then sometimes you're abused in foster care or you're in the group home and you run away. It is research that when a runaway leaves a group home or anywhere, they are approached within the first 48 hours by a trafficker. And traffickers know where they hang out, right? They know the group homes, they know the bus stations, etc. And so they promise what was so freely taken is now going to get paid for, and they're meeting the unmet needs. Oh, you have nowhere to stay. Oh, I'm going to be your daddy. I'm going to love you. I'm going to provide such and such. And it's really easy to get sucked into that lifestyle, especially if what was so freely taken is now going to get paid for. That seems like an upgrade, right? It just does, because that behavior has become so normalized and accepted. Then you think about our TV and entertainment and movies and music. When I was a kid, I watched Pretty Woman, right? Okay, well, Pretty Woman, remember that. And how glamorized the commercial sex trade was. And Julia Roberts looked empowered in that she was choosing this life. And I'll tell you, my 8 years in the commercial sex trade, Richard Gere never showed up in a Lamborghini and put a string of pearls around my neck, okay, because that's not the reality. And then you think about what's happening today with the youth on the internet and social media and Instagram, okay, and all the filters and the selfies. And then OnlyFans comes around, okay, and promises, oh, you're already posting half-naked provocative pictures on Instagram and you have a giant following. Now let's just upgrade this to OnlyFans, and now you can have a subscription base and you can get paid for those pictures. And that seems like the gateway. That seems exciting. That seems enticing. Okay, yeah, I might as well. And so young girls today don't even need a trafficker, right? Because the internet is providing that for us. And thanks to COVID, there was a big burst of everything online. I mean, online is obviously the number one place predators find their victims, and number one place victims are exploited, you know, with all the different websites and ads and apps. But it's insidious because young girls are being lied to and promised. You know, I've even been to middle school and I've asked girls who has an OnlyFans or who knows someone with an OnlyFans, and they all almost raised their hand. In middle school, okay, that's really young. And it is so dangerous that they're being exploited in this way because they don't have a legit trafficker. So they're not going to realize they're survivors of anything, right? Because they think they made the choice to post these pictures of themselves. And the dangerous thing is that now these subscribers have instant access to them, right? They can send them direct messages. They can ask for more explicit material. And it's just a slippery slope into more dangerous life of the commercial sex trade, which we also have to talk about porn, right? Because porn fuels the commercial sex trade. And again, thanks to our devices, young kids are exposed to porn at younger and younger ages today. Like back in the day when I was growing up, like we weren't exposed to porn as often because we had to go search for it, right? I don't know if you remember, but to find a dirty magazine, you had to like go dig in your brother or your father's corner of the darkest place in the house, right? Under the bed, in the closet, and you had to dig. Or if you went into a corner store to purchase a dirty magazine, there was a sheet or like a black trash bag over them, like hiding the images, and you had to probably be 18, etc. Now today, obviously, young kids are handed devices. We know this as young as younger than 5, right? And by accident, they're looking around and they're pressing different things and they're exposed to these images. And just like a drug, it releases these good, feel-good chemicals and hormones in the brain, and it becomes addicting, right? And you just watch it over and over again. I've talked to sex therapists, people who work in the anti-trafficking movement, who have had clients as young as 6 years old who are addicted to porn. And a little 6-year-old girl said, I think it's fine to have sex with whoever you want at any time, right? And we know that porn today is more dangerous and more violent, right? And so I've also talked to people who was working with an 11-year-old girl that was raped violently by a 17-year-old boy, and she thought that he liked her because that's what she had been viewing since she was 6 years old on the internet through porn, right? So how it distorts our brain and how the commercial sex trade promises one thing and gives something completely different, which is soul damage, deep, deep soul damage, because we just weren't designed to be bought and sold or to be exploited on the internet all day long. It's just not what we were designed to do. And it creates shame and soul damage, and porn inflicts that and creates this cycle. And unfortunately, men are the buyers, right? Now, I know there's men in the room and I'm thrilled, right? I'm glad to be having this conversation. No condemnation, shame, right? To any guy who's ever watched porn, been in a strip club, been to a bachelor party, engaged in prostitution, none of that. Like, I don't care, because you were sold a lie too, right? We're all taught that, again, think about the pretty woman, that this was exciting and this was her choice, and prostitution always is on that side, and it sells us that women's empowerment, and this is her choice and she must like it. And there has never been a survivor that I've talked to that enjoyed living that life. It was absolute hell. But we can't tell you that when we're in a session with you, right? If you're purchasing me, I have to have a facade and I have to have a smile on my face, whether I'm on screen or in person. I have to sell you this fake time because you're paying me. And if I don't give you a good time, you're not going to pay me. And if I have a pimp, I'm going to get in trouble because I have a quota to make, right? I'm supposed to come home with a certain amount of money. And so we're all playing into this cycle. And so to have trafficking, what do you need? A trafficker, a victim, and a buyer, right? And we're all coming out of this broken system. We're all struggling with some kind of brokenness, dysfunction, etc. And for me, I told you at the beginning, I was looking for love in all the wrong places. I was young, I was vulnerable, I was naive. I graduated vocational high school. I wanted to be a hairdresser because I needed a trade. I needed something to do with my life. My parents didn't talk about college. They didn't help me make plans. I basically raised myself, right? I was on my own from a young age. And my brother was 10 years older than me. He already moved out of the house. He had a lot of dysfunction in his life. He was sexually abused by a family member when he was probably 6, 7 years old, and no one knew about it that I know. And he was just gone, by the time he was 18. So I was just left on my own. And I was in community college, North Shore Community in Lynn. I wanted to be a journalist. So I thought I'd move to New York, write for a fashion magazine, work at a hair salon, right? I had dreams, I had goals, I was figuring it out. And I was also partying and drinking and hanging out with the wrong people. And does anyone ever go up to the North Shore and go to the Palace nightclub? Or am I too far away from home? Okay. It took me like an hour and a half to get here, so I understand how far I am from the North Shore. The Palace nightclub was typical nightclub. To get in, the guys were 21 and the girls were 18. I was underage. I was probably heading there when I was 15 years old, partying and drinking with my friends. But at this point, I was around 18, 19, just graduated, and I'm hanging out with some girlfriends, and I meet a guy who knows some friends, right? So he's not a complete stranger. He's not the guy in the white van trying to kidnap us off the street. If anything, he knows friends and he's familiar. And so he brings me to the bar and he spends $7 on me and buys me a drink, and I'm impressed, right? That's all it took. And he had money and he had jewelry and he had a lot of cash and he was handsome. And we exchanged phone numbers and get together a few days later, and he shows up in a champagne-colored Mercedes-Benz and plenty of red flags, right? And when I talk to girls in college or younger, I'm always like, hey, note to self, like don't date the drug dealer, right? Like it's probably not a good idea. But that's something else that our culture and society glamorizes. Think about the rap music and hip hop and that whole culture, how that's totally glamorized. And I don't care, I don't think anything of it, but he's coming out of his own brokenness, right? Why do traffickers become traffickers? They're not all male. I've worked with many women whose mothers were their first exploiters, right? Because she has a drug addiction, so she trades the daughter for drugs. Very common. And when the light bulbs go on and these poor women realize, wow, I was exploited way before I met my pimp by my own mother. That is devastating, life-changing, etc. But it makes all sense and it puts all the pieces together. And he was coming out of a broken system, never knew his father, raised on the streets of Boston, Dorchester, Roxbury, sold guns and drugs for a living. He was a hustler. And he was being taught the rules of the game by other pimps and traffickers. Very common, right? Your father's a pimp, your uncle is, guys on the street, kind of gets passed down. And he's being taught the rules of the game. And so I would be his first one. So he had no other women at the time, so he really played that boyfriend role. And so to help people understand this, manipulation and coercion, it runs deep. It's almost like being in a cult, right? It's mental and emotional bondage. I was never handcuffed to a radiator. Yes, does that happen? Absolutely. Do women get stuffed in crates and storage containers? Yes, I've worked with them. But I was more mentally and emotionally in bondage. And he played that boyfriend role. And what do you think his number one goal was to do? Was for what? Get me to love and trust him, right? So what do you think he'd do? How do you think he would groom me? What do you think some of the tactics he would use to groom me into this position of loving and trusting him? Tell me. Yep, get your hair, nails done, clothes, take you shopping, go to the mall. Yep.
Making you feel important.
Making me feel important, exactly. or beautiful or seen. Yes. Any other ideas? He met my family, right? He came over for Christmas, Thanksgiving, played the total boyfriend role, and just seemed like everything was normal. And at the time of us dating, he would plant these seeds of doubt in my mind. Well, why would you want to go to school for journalism? That's stupid. Why would you want to work at a hair salon? You can own one. I know a way we can make a lot of money. You can have a family, a business, a home. You can have anything that you want. And he never said, I'm going to be a pimp, you're going to be a prostitute, like, right? He never said those words, but he just slowly plant these seeds of doubt in my mind, make me believe that his dreams and goals were way bigger and better and we could get to the end goal faster because we had this way to make money. And again, here's the kicker. You're having sex anyway, so you might as well get paid for it. And then I'm like, yeah, you're right. All right. And then it turns into all of a sudden this women's empowerment thing. Yeah, you're right. I might as well get paid for it. And I'm going to, and it just turns into this thing. And when you've been used and abused, you become the aggressor sometimes, right? Because you're like, you know what? I'm not going to get hurt anymore, so I'm going to give it to them, right? I'm going to be tough. I'm going to become the aggressor so no one hurts me. This happens. It's a slow process. You don't realize it's happening, but this gives you this false sense of power, this false sense of security. And then never mind when you start making all that money, it gives you even more security. How many times do you feel secure when your bank account has a certain amount of money in it, right? That's the human nature. We feel safe, we feel good. Okay, my bank account has so much money in it, everything's gonna be fine, right? Right, no, it's not true, right? Or when we're healthy, when we're at our best, we feel secure, and then the roof caves in, right? So he's selling me this fake dream. I have the culture and society screaming at me that this is a good way to do it. I have my own early childhood trauma, not making connections. And then I happen to have a best friend who gets involved in the commercial sex trade, but I don't realize it. I just think she has a new boyfriend, and she kind of disappears. I don't see her for a few weeks, which is normal when you're that age, right? Your girlfriend disappears because she's in love with this new guy. Okay, I get invited to a college party, Salem State University, and all the boys are in their dorm, and they're all drinking and partying, and they tell me that a woman's going to come in to be the entertainment. I think nothing of it. Again, stripping, it's fine, right? Everything's fine. You don't realize the harms. And the girl goes in, we're all drunk, and the girl comes in, she goes to take off her clothes and entertain us, and I realize it's my best friend. I was shocked. I didn't think she got into this life. I had no idea. Obviously, she doesn't dance. We cry, ruin the party, and they kick us out, right? A bunch of drunk college boys, obviously. So I go back home to my boyfriend, and I tell him what happened, and don't you know, he happens to know her trafficker. And a few days later, he reunites us, takes me to our house. Now she lives in Chestnut Hill, right? Nice, big, expensive, affluent area. No one would ever imagine that a trafficker lives in this beautiful home with a fence around it, a Range Rover and a BMW, and a bunch of women inside. And this is considered his stable. No one has any idea that this is happening because no one's paying attention, right? And so I walk in, the home's big and beautiful. Again, she's not handcuffed to a radiator, she's not beaten. All the women look really good. And they all have their own bedrooms, or they share because there's so many of them. And I go into her room and she has clothes and shoes and jewelry, Louis Vuitton bags, right? 19 Louis Vuitton bags, like the epitome of success. And I start to think, all right, maybe this isn't so bad, okay? And she's telling me that, yeah, she works at a massage parlor and she does these dances and she gives her man all the money and he buys her anything that she wants, and et cetera. And that these women she lives with are called her wife-in-laws. So I start realizing there's a whole nother language to this, there's a whole nother way that this world operates. And I finally, agree to my boyfriend to be sent down to Connecticut to the massage parlor. But did I really make the choice based on the truth? No, right? I hope I paint that picture very clear for you, that it wasn't a choice based on the truth. It was a choice based on my early childhood trauma, my need to be loved and paid attention to, that desire to have someone see me and provide, and a family, etc. But I wasn't told the reality of what was going to happen. My friend teaches me how to hustle, how to make the most amount of money with doing the least amount of work. And at this time, the combat zone in Boston, right, downtown, I'm sure you've heard of that area, was kind of being cleaned up, right? The streets were getting cleaned up. And really all that means is they were pushing prostitution indoors. And massage parlors were really popular. This was a long time ago. And nowadays, you're only going to see Asian massage parlors, which is a whole nother conversation about how those women are brought here to America. They don't speak the language. Their identification is all compensated. They are told they have a huge amount of debt to pay back that was completely never possible, and that they're held here, and how much shame that their culture would heap on them if their parents ever found out what happened to them, or sometimes their parents sell them into it, right, out of desperation if you're coming out of poverty. But that is a whole other conversation about the Asian massage parlors that maybe you even know are in your community. But today, there aren't really no American massage parlors or brothels because everything's online, except if you go to Nevada, where prostitution is legal in some parts. And trafficking happens through the legal system all day, every day. You can't tell me it doesn't, because I was trafficked through the legal system in Nevada. Anyway, he sends me down to Hartford, Connecticut, because it was hardcore, meaning it was kind of like the streets indoor. The clients were cheap. The place was disgusting. It was in the busy district, finance district of Hartford. I worked, and I don't think sex should ever be called work, but I was exploited there from 10 a.m. to 1 a.m. So you had to work a long time for extended amounts of period, days in a row, on purpose. And the men would come in and pay a door fee for half an hour or an hour, $60 or $80, and they'd come into a lounge area that was very dark and musty. The little couches you sat on were sticky. Everything had like a grimy feeling. There was no windows. Everyone in the room was trafficked, either 16 to 60-year-olds, all women and girls. And then they'd get to come around and hand a ticket to whoever they chose. And you'd wear a skimpy dress, high heel stilettos. You could, like a strip club, right? Think about that kind of attire. And I had a duffel bag full of baby wipes, condoms, the clothes. And my friend taught me how to, again, hustle, right? And how to make the most amount of money. And my trafficker gave me rules and certain things that I wasn't allowed to do. And the men give you the ticket. They go around the back to the shower area where they're supposed to shower and change. And then you come back around and you meet them. And there's a whole long hallway with 8 or 9 rooms. And there's a mattress and a nightstand in the room. And you go in there and you do what you do for the hour, the half hour. But I'll tell you, this man was a regular. He came every Friday. He always wanted the newest girl. And of course, that would be me that week. And I can remember like it's yesterday, right? Those details are in my brain. The trauma never leaves. The effects of the trauma leave, but the memories don't necessarily go away. And he was old. He could have been my grandfather. I remember his name. I remember what he looked like. I remember what kind of clothes he had on. I remember the beginning details, until I actually had to go exchange myself, and I completely disassociated, right? I unplugged. It was like we just shut the switch off. Boop, I'm gone, because my body naturally protected itself. I was not on drugs at the time. I was completely sober. But, thank goodness God creates us in a way to like be able to survive certain things, right? And my brain just shut off. And at the end, I remember being excited because he handed me $80 or $100, right? And that produces adrenaline. When all that money starts running through your hands, again, you're like, ooh, look at that. Think about coming out of poverty. You've never seen a $50 bill in your life. Now all of a sudden, all this money is running through your hands. Again, changes the brain, creates addiction. And I do this over and over and over again for these 3 days in a row. I had to sleep at a little nasty motel next door. He finally comes back, picks me up, and we come back home to Boston. It's like 5, 6 in the morning. I have no idea. It's daylight. I'm tired. I barely eaten. I'm completely disgusted and ashamed. I feel dirty from the inside out. And we get out of the car, and I have a pocket full of money. And we get out of the car, and he puts out his hand. And I knew that gesture meant to hand over the money. But in my mind, I sat logically thinking, why would I give you all the money? Wait a second, you weren't even there. If I'm on the street, I need a pimp because I need protection. Duh. But I'm indoors, and I have plenty of protection. And I thought you were my boyfriend. I thought you loved me. I'm just having sex with strangers. Like, this is weird. And he just looks at me, and he says, is there going to be a problem? And I say, no. And I hand it over because it was like not an option at that point. Like, I knew what he meant. And at that point, as I reflect, I look back and I think, wow, I lost my voice. I lost my courage. I was full of shame. I was disgusted. And I just go back home to my parents' house. I go back to college. I go back to working at the hair salon. And every few days, I disappear and I get sent down to Connecticut. No one had any idea what was going on in my life. And I wasn't going to tell my parents I was a prostitute because I barely had a relationship with them, never mind telling them something so stigmatized and shameful. And I'm trying to manage this. And after a few weeks, maybe a month of this, I start to change my mind. And I start to speak up and use my voice. And we're in the car coming home from Connecticut. It's probably 3 a.m. And I say something he doesn't like. And he backhands me so hard, this side of my head hits the glass because I was driving. And I had to pull over because I couldn't see. My vision became blurry. And he just proceeds to pull me out of the car and beat me on the side of the highway. And luckily, there was another pimp in the back who pulled him off of me, threw me in the car, and I just cried the whole way home because that's when I realized, oh crap, what did I get myself into, right? I had never experienced domestic violence. My father wasn't a violent man. I wasn't even educated probably on what domestic violence was. I didn't understand. And before I know it, I'm completely isolated. And I'm living with him. I'm pulled out of college. My whole life became enmeshed, and this was it, and this was my life. And I live with him. I become his bottom bitch. That's the term they use, meaning I have to cook, clean, do the laundry, go food shopping, go to work as a prostitute. Whatever he tells me to do, I need to do. And everything is controlled. It's almost like domestic violence on steroids, right? Because of the shame that you're feeling through the exploitation. And so long story short, I was with him for 5 years under his control. I tried to escape many times. I would run away. I would always go to my parents' house because thank goodness I had parents. You know how many women stay in those cycles because they have nowhere safe to go. But I always go to my parents' house. He'd come, he'd badger me, he'd cry, he'd show up with gifts, promise he won't hit me anymore. And I always went back. Why? Because I believed I was a no good, dirty prostitute. My experiences told me that was true as well. He told me that was true. And at the core of it, it's an identity disturbance, right? I don't know who I am. I believe I'm a prostitute. No one's going to love me. No one's going to accept me. This is as good as it gets. And I would stay in this cycle for all these years. And then worked up in another massage parlor in Kittery, Maine that was a little more high class. And the way you worked there was you went to real massage therapy school and you got trained on massage therapy techniques. And when you were finished with the class, you took a sealed envelope, which was apparently your certificate, and a lot of cash to the lawyer, who then paid off the local police chief, and that's how it stayed open. And it was open for like 30 years. And if you're ever bored in your criminal justice and you want to Google it, it was called the Danish Health Club. It was pretty infamous, and it was in Kittery, Maine. And that place was open for a long time due to this inn that they had with the local police chief. And so I was there for 2 years, and I'll tell you, the majority of the women there all trafficked. If they weren't at that time, they were older, and they didn't have traffickers anymore, but they were still involved in the trade. And then I even worked with women who were teachers by day and came there at night and had a trafficker under his control. She worked with special needs kids during the day and would come up there at night. And she had a trafficker, and she was involved with him for about 20 years at that point, okay? So you never know what a trafficking victim looks like. We look like regular people sometimes. So I was there for a while, and the owner died. They had lots of issues, and I had a sense that the place was going to get busted. So I talked my trafficker into letting me leave, and the only reason why he let me leave was because the internet became popular. Remember all those things you used to hear about Craigslist, women getting murdered in hotel rooms and stuff, and people would meet off Craigslist? Yeah, you could literally buy a refrigerator and a human off the same website. And this was new. And he started posting ads of me on the internet and all of the websites, and he allowed me to leave. The place ends up getting busted. As I, did research later on in years, I realized there was an underage girl there. I knew she was young, but I didn't know how young she was because I was in my own survival mode. She was 13. She was a typical story. She was a runaway, and she got picked up by a local pimp and brought up there to be exploited. But guess what? She had an aunt who was looking for her. Do you know how many kids go missing each year in the U.S.? National Center for Missing and Exploited Children, I'm pretty sure, say about 300,000 kids go missing each year in the U.S., and about 100,000 of those kids fall through the cracks and end up in the trade because the system is too big, it's too broken and overloaded, and no one's looking for them. But this girl had an aunt, and she kept calling and put all the pieces together, and they finally recovered her. So the place got busted. I'm being exploited online. My trafficker also sent me again to Nevada, where the system is legal. I was exploited there, to Florida, high-priced escorting, all over the country, wherever it was. But being exploited online also makes it more vulnerable and more dangerous because now you're out of the safety of a club, right? Now I'm going in people's homes, people's businesses after hours. And I can't tell you how many wealthy homes I went into, Lexington, Natick, wherever I was, when the wife and kids weren't there, right? How many businesses I visited, how many of the fancy hotels downtown Boston I would go into when the men came here for business, et cetera, right? And so if we didn't have such a demand, there wouldn't be such a supply. right? And then we have to think about that. If you want trafficking to end, if you want to do something about it, we have to hit it at the root, which is the demand and the over-sexualization of our youth. It's just facts, right? So with that said, being online, it had been almost 5 years, 4 years maybe at this point. My trafficker ends up talking me into going to college to get a business degree. So I was actually in Bunker Hill Community College for 2 years, paid for all my classes with cash, and I got a business degree, an associate's degree in business, being trafficked at the same time. Made the dean's list, did everything really good. I have no idea how I passed. I hate math. Like, I don't even know how I did this, a business degree, and made dean's list. But I poured everything I could into that degree, because somewhere in my mind I thought, you know what, nothing's going to come true what he's promising me, but he can't take away the degree. So I worked really hard at it, and I did well. I made one friend in college, and unfortunately he was like a guy from another country, and he wanted citizenship, and he asked me to marry him for like $4,000. I was like, dude, I can't. First of all, that's not enough money. And if my boyfriend finds out that he'll kill you and me, forget it. Like, you're going to get us killed. Like, stay away from me, right? I made one friend in college, because I obviously wasn't going to talk to anybody, right? You can't live a normal life and live these double lives, and it's just impossible. So I made it through that, and I started feeling more confident, right? I'm not as stupid as he says. Like, I'm going to be all right. I'm going to fight through this. I struggled severely with all types of issues. I saw my primary care physician constantly, 2 to 3 times a month. All types of issues. I'm depressed. I have anxiety. I have ADD. I have ADHD. Whatever it was, I was looking for meds. All right, I was trying to solve the pain. I was trying to make that go away. Thank goodness I never got addicted to anything, because I wouldn't have had the whereabouts, right, to keep fighting. I had all types of OCD type issues. I was totally skinny, anorexic, all types of problems. A lump in my throat because my body was physically reacting to the stress that I was under, but I had no idea. I thought I just always had heartburn, right? I had no idea what was wrong. Tattoos with his name on it, breast implants, always black eyes, headaches, all types of bruising. I'm trying to give you all the red flags. Multiple cell phones. Obviously, I drove fancy cars, had tons of money, cash, like all these things that I shouldn't have had in my early 20s. Tons of red flags. And my doctor just kind of tagged me as domestic violence. And he was always just too busy to make eye connection with me, right? He was always his back turned on the computer, asking me questions, not really making that eye contact. But there was a really compassionate nurse practitioner who would sit down and look me in the eye, and she would ask me questions, and she tagged me as domestic violence. And I actually saw the DV clinic one time, and that lady planted some seeds. You know, she told me I didn't have to be accepting being treated this way. And I was like, oh, I don't? You know, like just these little seeds along the way. And I got stronger a little bit along the way. And then I was finally able to make my exit. But by God's grace in my life, being exploited online also opened the door to an opportunity. Now, prostitution research, there's plenty of it, says that when a woman's ready to leave the commercial sex trade, she needs one safe, supportive person to reach out to. Just one, because she is so isolated in that life. And I was online being exploited, and I happened to meet a sex buyer. I went to his house, but nothing sexual happened. And I thought it was strange, and he paid me a lot of money. And week after week, he would continue to call me back, and I'd go hang out over his house, and he'd watch SpongeBob with me, and we'd laugh, and he'd pay me a lot of money. And I liked it, because this was a reprieve, right? It was like nothing was happening. Now, I'm not telling any guy in the room to go home and start trying to rescue women out of the commercial sex trade this way. That's probably not safe, and it'll cost you a lot of money. But you never know when you're going to be in a position to help somebody. But the best way is to be non-judgmental, supportive, and it might take a while. So just love them along the way, right? And just help along the way. A little bit goes a long way. And so finally, about this time, it had been 5 years. I graduated, I have the degree. And to help you understand, he had tons of other women that he was exploiting. And just off of me, I would keep track of how much money I was making, and I'd always go to him, can I stop, can I finish? And in 1 month, in 30 days, in 1 month, I made $28,000. Okay, just off of one woman. Can you imagine how much money this guy was bringing in with all these other women that he was exploiting? And it was never enough. It was never enough. And I become pregnant with my trafficker's child right around this time. Now, A lot of traffickers do impregnate their women on purpose to keep more control over them, which is even more complicated through the legal system of custody and visitation issues. And I didn't care. I thought this baby would help me retire, help me stop. He wouldn't exploit me while I was pregnant. He would purchase me while I was pregnant, right? I just thought it would save me. And so I was holding on to this pregnancy. In a sense, I was like excited because I thought I could retire. I thought this was going to be the dream, right? Like the family, the business, everything he promised. And unfortunately, he forced me to terminate that pregnancy. And I was holding on to the time in Massachusetts. There was a law at that time. I don't remember the details, but I knew you couldn't have an abortion after a certain amount. And I was holding on to that, thinking I won't legally be able to go. And I forget what it was, but he was forcing me. And I knew if I didn't go to the clinic, something god-awful would happen to me. Obviously, he was a violent man with guns and weapons and everything else that I've experienced. So I believed him, right? That baby was gonna get murdered no matter what. And so I did what I had to do. And I'll tell you, it created so much shame, so much trauma. That's a whole other conversation about abortion. Never mind when it's forced. It was horrific. And that lit the fire inside of me. And I was like, you know what? I gotta go. You can use and abuse me all these years, but to make me take a life, I'm all set. This is never gonna come true. I have to get out of here. So I started saving money without him noticing. I started taking a few $100s off the top, because even if he wasn't home, I was trained to put the money exactly where I was supposed to. So I started taking a few $100 off the top. I put it in Ziploc bags, and I tie elastics around it really tight. And I'd put it in the dirt in my potted plants. And I'd hide the money in there, because I knew he wouldn't look in the dirt. And now I have a few $1,000s. I want to get my own apartment. But how does a woman walk into the real estate agency and fill out an application who's been in the commercial sex trade? I don't care if it's 1 year or 10. We can't. And that is what it's designed to do. Please remember, if there's one thing that you remember, prostitution is not the world's oldest profession. It is the world's oldest oppression against women and children, because that's what it is designed to do. The door gets that much further away on purpose. I have no job. I have no reference. I have tons of debt in my name. I have mental health issues. I have, never mind women with drug addiction, children to take care of. How can I fill out an application and actually walk on and rebuild my life? There's no exit ramps. It's almost impossible. But I'm determined. And guess what? The SpongeBob guy happens to own a small business. He owned a corner store in East Boston. And I reached out to him and I said, hey, I'm in a big situation. You have no idea. My name's not whatever. It's Jasmine. Can you lie for me and say that I work for you and make me pay stubs? And he said, sure. And I became the bookkeeper. Or another big joke, because I would never be a bookkeeper in my life. And I go and I get the apartment. That simple. A lot of cash, a job, you got the apartment. Okay, great. Now, do you think my trafficker is going to help me pack and help me move? No. Do you know why it's so hard to leave the commercial sex trade too? Because you leave with nothing. Zip, zero, when you're leaving a trafficker. He's not going to help you pack. You're not going to take the granite and the leather and all the things. Nothing. The cars that are in your name, those are all staying behind. So you did all that for all these years, and you're walking away with zero. So I called the local police, which I never would have did because I was so loyal and so trained to be loyal. I said, my boyfriend's going to get mad. Can you hang out on the porch when I leave? So the cop stood here, my boyfriend, my trafficker stood there, and I left with 2 trash bags. Basically nothing. My cat and my dog, because he didn't want those anyway. And I get into one of the cars that was in my name, and I drive to my big, empty apartment. It was huge. It was expensive. I had nothing. Luckily, again, I have a mom, and I give her credit. She struggled. But if I called her, she showed up, right? And she helped me buy some furniture. She put it together. I didn't have the courage to tell her what had really gone on in my life. Couldn't articulate it. But she had seen the bruising. She had seen me come in and out of her house so many times. She knew it was something wrong. And I made her, I told her, he made me do things that I didn't really want, but I didn't get into detail. Time goes on, a few weeks. What do you think I do? Call him back, right? Because of trauma bonding, Stockholm Syndrome, where victims feel intense emotional bonds to their abuser. And I don't know how to do life without him. And there's also rules to this life. If I go out and prostitute on my own, I'm a renegade. And if he catches me, he'll kill me. Or I choose another pimp, or I get purchased by another pimp, but I didn't know much more violent he was going to be than this guy. So let me try to stick to what I know. I'll live here, you live there with all the other women, I'll give you a cut of the money. We'll call it a day. More time goes on, my big, brilliant plan doesn't work. And one night after a big fight, which was completely normal, broke a glass door to my apartment, a lot of blood, the whole scene, very violent. I had the courage to call 911, and he was arrested for domestic violence charges, which helped me get a restraining order the next day. Okay, that was helpful. The piece of paper kept him away. A lot of traffickers don't care about a piece of paper. They're coming after you anyway. But this kept him away. I was causing a lot of heat, drama, and he left me alone. Great. I go to try to get a normal job, 9 to 5, secretary. I couldn't even function. I was like a fish out of water. I couldn't talk to people. I didn't know how to operate in the normal world. And then at the end of the month, I can't pay my bills. I don't even know idea how to do this. I'm making what, $8 an hour or something? I had no idea how to function. And I'm hanging out with all new friends. They're all coming over my big empty apartment, and enter in OxyContin, cocaine and alcohol and everything else. I did not set off to become addicted. By no means. I just wanted the pain to go away. No addict decides, I can't wait to be a junkie. Like, that is not it. Something's happening, and we just want the pain to go away. The pain went away, but then life unraveled, right? You can't live a normal, productive life and get high. And that pushed me back into the life of prostitution, not with a pimp, but with a growing drug habit. Life would unravel. I'd become a heroin addict. I'd be a typical story, overdosing, Dunkin' Donut bathrooms, sleeping on park benches, stealing from my beloved grandparents that I told you about, stealing from my mother, you name it, getting arrested, been there, done that. Typical junkie on the street, prostitute, etc. My brother dies in 2006, which leads me to another wake-up call. I was like, if I keep living like this, I'm gonna die, my parents are gonna have no kids, and that's just sad, right? Because again, something was planted in me from that young age to know this was not supposed to be my life, but I just didn't know how to get back to who I was supposed to be. And I remember overdosing many times, and the EMTs were always the most compassionate people. And the EMTs would Narcan me to wake me up from an overdose, and a few times look at me, again, compassionately in the eyes and say, what are you doing here? Or like, go home. And I remember, what am I doing here, and how do I get home? Right? It's been almost a decade. And time would go on. I would try to think about recovery. People would come into my life and tell me about AA and NA and treatment, and I thought that was a joke, because if you didn't run out of money, it was never a problem. Right? It only became a problem when you had no money. And that became the reoccurring theme. I had no money, and it was getting more violent and more dangerous on the streets. And so I finally thought about treatment. I went into recovery so many times. I can't tell you how many times. But my last treatment center was actually down here. I don't know how far I am from Plymouth. Are we even near Plymouth a little bit? So I went to High Point, Plymouth, and that was my last time in treatment in 2007. And it was a really compassionate counselor there who looked me again in the face and caught wind of my story and looked at me and said, you never have to sell yourself again. And I thought, I don't, right? Like, I don't, that's not an option. I don't have to do that anymore. Okay. And so when I got clean, I inherently knew I have to put down the prostitution. Everything has to go, because now they were going hand in hand. And that is so, so true about how linked substance use is to the commercial sex trade. It is very closely linked. I've never met a survivor who hasn't had some kind of addiction. Either we get addicted on the way out to cope with all the trauma, we get addicted while we're in to stay in and to maintain, or we're already addicted in the first place, and that becomes the push into the life. Makes sense, right? And so I got clean and sober, put everything down. My first 5 years of recovery, I did not know I was a survivor. No one talked about it then, right? Trafficking wasn't a thing. I just pushed it down. I wasn't gonna raise my hands in an AA meeting and say I was a prostitute or I had a pimp. I wasn't gonna tell the church ladies when I found a church that I was a prostitute, right? Who says those things? That's so shameful. Just like so many women don't talk about, or boys talk about their early childhood sexual abuse, right? Like, it's just so shameful, and you feel like as soon as you say that, the roof's gonna set on fire or something, right? But it keeps us sick and it keeps us silent. So 5 years in, I had a child, single, raised him, okay. I met my husband in church, we got married, and that's when all my trauma came out. And I always joke and say, if you want a way to make your trauma expose itself, get married or get into an intimate relationship. Oh my gosh, that is all we did was trigger each other. And everything he did went right into that category. Bad, pimp, bad, you're dangerous, violent, like everything just flooded, and I could not function in this relationship. And after our daughter was born, we separated, and I sought deeper healing. I knew I was a mess. Obviously, my life was falling apart. And again, I had to become a Christian, so I sought through my faith and through counseling how to get well. And long story short, it's in the book, but I was healed. I was legit healed of the shame, and I found out I was a survivor. someone told me to my face, "You're a survivor." And that's when it all changed. So I no longer looked through the lens of a victim, but I was a survivor, and I had to go back out and tell all the other women, if I'm a survivor, maybe you are, and guess what? There's a better way. Let me show you this better way. And so I started making bags filled with toiletries, soap, shampoo, conditioner, toothpaste. I jump in my minivan with my kids. And again, I live near Lynn. It's easy to find women in Lynn on the street, so I'd go to Lynn, I'd hand out these bags, I'd put some resources in there, tell them, call me if you need help, give them a hug, and go on my way. People started wanting to give me money, wanted to donate, so it turned into a big thing. And at first, I didn't have a name for it, but then it was just like, what's the name of your organization? What's the name of your ministry? And I'm like, Bags of Hope. I have no idea. I just hope. I just want to give these women hope. I started working for a nonprofit in Boston. If you guys are familiar with My Life, My Choice, it's a really great resource. And I started mentoring at-risk girls. And I loved all those young girls that I would mentor. The stories that they've been through are you'd never imagine either. And I started getting involved in the anti-trafficking movement, sharing my story all over the country, training law enforcement, healthcare providers, etc. And so at this point, here I am, again, I think 12 years into doing this work in the anti-trafficking movement. We run groups in halfway houses and in jails. We give out over 1,000 bags a year because people donate so much stuff. It's wonderful. I raise my own support. I don't take any government or state funding to do the work. Everything's private grants and private donations. I have 2 employees, actually 3 employees. They're all either survivors or women in recovery. And I have a home that just opened in New Hampshire, and it's called Living Hope Farms. And we take women and small children who are exiting the life of the commercial sex trade, and they can stay with us for a year as they work on their healing and recovery. Reconciled my husband somewhere in there, wrote a book, had another baby. Right? I got 5 kids all together, 20 all the way down to 6. I live in New Hampshire now. And I really think the link is of healing from trauma is forgiveness. And that is really controversial, but it was a long process, and I didn't set out to forgive, but I was able to forgive my trafficker, be able to forgive myself, and really move on and really just have that hope, right, to continue to help other women and compelling. Like, I can't imagine doing anything else with my life and my story, because obviously God is using it for good to help so many other women. And so I hope you learned something. I don't know if we have time. I have no idea what time it is. Yeah, we have questions. I don't know if I, scared the socks off you or whatever, but like, do you have thoughts? Do you have questions? I was totally transparent and vulnerable, hoping that you learned something, and I would love to answer your questions. Thank you so much. Yeah.
Yeah, do you know anything about what's happening in this area around anti-trafficking? I think there's some work being done in the New Bedford area.
Mm-hmm.
Could you talk about that a little?
Yeah, there is. I've been here a couple of times with New Bedford, and I'm trying to think of Plymouth County Sheriff's Department, Sheriff's DA's office. There's a lot of anti-trafficking work being done down here. And it looks the same everywhere, right? Trafficking looks the same here as it does in New Hampshire. It's all over the place, but there's just a lack of services and a lack of exit ramps for people trying to get out. So we can do all the preventative that we want and talk about it, but if there's no way to exit, people stay in. But yeah.
So are there any exiting programs in this Plymouth County, Bristol County? No.
Worcester. I know Worcester. That's far up. Yeah.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah. That's all. I don't know anywhere else. Oh, there is one, like a church, and I can't think of the name. I'll have to ask Emily from the DA's office. She would have that information. And I know the Child Advocacy Center and DCF, they're all, trained in doing anti-trafficking work for sure. Yeah. Did you have a question?
Yeah, I'm always intrigued by the abuse of power with police officers.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm wondering, have you met any other individuals who had an experience with the local police who are being paid off, and if so, what were those towns?
I haven't. All I know is that today, law enforcement has come a long way. There's always a few bad apples, right, in the bunch. But no, for the majority, I've worked with Homeland Security, FBI, local departments, and they are very aware and compassionate, being trained in trauma-informed care, partnering with mental health and substance use facilities, doing the whole wraparound care, partnering with social workers. No, and really have come a long way in the terms of, remember like back in the day, the women that I've worked with, you know, cops would be on the street, and instead of arresting the prostitutes, they'd ask for favors, right? And so they were abused in that sense. But now I really do think that it has turned, and cops are really interested in helping and serving and protecting.
Thank you.
Yeah.
And thank you for your voice.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, I work in the field of gender-based violence, and for a long, long number of years, actually, over 50, I'd say, so I'm dating myself. But what I'm aware today is that there is like Coyote in Rhode Island, there are people who have taken the stand that they can sell their own bodies if they want, and the thing is to be safe doing that. I'm wondering what you think about all of that, given your experience, because when you were speaking, you were talking about a point where you said, oh yeah, this is cool. I'm getting paid. Look at all the things, you know, cars, clothes, and all that. And I'm wondering if you're aware of this side of the story here, where people are deciding, yes, I'm taking control of my body. Yes, this is what I really want to do. And actually in the field of sexual assault, there is a growing support for that decision. Like, maybe, I don't know, maybe it's the key that the people are empowered themselves. They're the ones that make the decision. They're the ones that get all the money. I'm just wondering what you think about all this.
Yeah, it's a great question. And there is a big sweep across the nation, especially in New England, to legalize prostitution, to completely legalize it. And I am not in favor of that, because there's a very slim, small majority of people who say it's empowering and that they like it and that they're choosing this. Small compared to the vast amount of people who get trafficked through that system. So I'm in favor of partial decriminalization. I still want to criminalize the traffickers and the brothel owners, and I want to offer exit ramps to the victims to come out to become survivors. Now, those people who say this is empowering and this is great, there is no way that you can have a healthy, normal, functioning life afterwards or while you're still in it, being married and having children. Like, how do you do that? How do you be a prostitute during the day or at night, right, and be married to a spouse and then raise children in that life? I'm sorry, that is not normal, right? I don't have any other words for it. And it creates deep soul damage and shame. And it's so false and so fake because you have to be whoever the buyer wants you to be. And again, it is gender inequality because the buyers are always male, right? And you think that you're the one with the power because you're the one making the money. But they're the ones with the power because they have the money. And you have to do whatever they want you to do. And you have to be whoever they want you to be. And it's just so exhausting and fake and identity disturbance. It just really is. And I've never talked to a sex worker personally to like have a debate and have a conversation, but I would love to, because I just can't fathom that at the end of the day, this is really empowering. You may have a college degree, you may have a condo that you pay $5,000 for a month. Like, okay, so what? How do you sleep at night? You know, and do you have meaningful relationships in your life? Because that's where it's at. That, right, where do we really become fulfilled in our lives? Yeah, I could go on, but that's where I stand.
I have a question for you. So, trauma keeps the score, right?
Yeah.
And so, just reflecting on everything that you said, it's kind of difficult question, right? How difficult it is to navigate that trauma, and how do you do it? I mean, what is the process?
Oh, it's messy. Yeah. What is the process to navigate through trauma?
You mentioned PTSD,
Yeah.
panic attacks.
Yep.
How do you nightmares.
Yep.
How do you do that?
Yeah. One day at a time, one step at a time, a good counselor, therapist. I know a lot of people use, is it EDMR or EM? I always get the thing confused. But safe, good community. You need good, safe, supportive people in your life, non-judgmental people. Again, for me, for my faith, right? My faith has been the anchor and has helped me completely heal and be able to forgive and to move forward. It just takes time. And so for the women that come into our home, it's a 4-phase program, right? And we work on little by slow, and we, peel the layers of the onion, right, to get to the core. And the majority of the women have early childhood sexual abuse. And we talk about healing from that first to understand that those effects from the trauma. Yeah.
Hi, I am really loud because I'm a teacher.
Ah.
So, I am a health teacher, and I've taught health from, well, K to 12. Right now, I'm specifically in 9 to 12, but I've done 6 through 12 for the last 7, 8, 9 years. Sexual violence, sex in general, pornography, substance abuse, misuse, mental health, that all falls under my jurisdiction, so to speak. What can I do to better benefit my students?
Yeah.
I have had at least one that we know of that has been sex trafficked.
Yep. So I've worked with a health teacher in Andover High School, and she invites me in every year, and I speak to her her seniors. And it's so funny. She goes, I don't want to share you with the whole school because I like you coming in just to specialize with my class. And so I talk to her health students. I've done that at Saugus High School. And she watches different documentaries that are written, to prove about the commercial sex trade. There's so many good ones out there now. But I have a really great resource for you too. It's called the Cool Aunt series. The Cool Aunt. And this woman, her name is Rachel Thomas. She's a survivor of the trade of trafficking, and she's the Cool Aunt Rachel. And it's an online platform that goes through a whole education series. And it's meant to be with youth and one, mentor or adult to go through it with them. And it totally educates, talks about myths, talks about red flags, et cetera. Because we have to educate, we have to have these conversations in order to prevent it. And that is the most, I think middle school, is necessary. They read my book. A lot of my, my book is curriculum. And in some courses, I think Francisco does that, but even in some high schools, they read through the book and have honest conversations about the harms of the commercial sex trade and trafficking. Yeah. That's all I got for you. I hope that was helpful. Yeah. Yeah.
Let me do my exercise.
So I remember in your story, you talk about when you wanted to leave the brothel in Maine, your pimp allowed you because of the internet and stuff. So like, right now, like there's this whole movement of OnlyFans and, website like OnlyFans. I'm just wondering, what are your views on this whole movement? Like,
Right, because you don't even need a pimp necessarily, right? Because of OnlyFans and all the websites and webcamming, absolutely. And so, like, the college campus is like the #1 dangerous place right now for young girls, because even in New Hampshire, this is like coming off track, but at UNH, there were flyers of sugar daddies looking for sugar babies, right? Flyers on campus. And that's another slippery slope into the commercial sex trade, because I'm a sugar baby and I'm so pretty and I'm so young and I can just get paid for companionship. Well, no, right? Because the door gets opened and nothing's just for free, right? That door's going to open, there's going to be an expectation there, and there's going to be sex or sexual favors coming down the line. Absolutely. And young girls, again, are enticed by this because they need all the things. They're poor, they want an apartment, et cetera. So it's enticing, just like OnlyFans. But it just has to be talked about, the dangers of it and how completely insidious it is, and how it opens the door to more and more exploitation. And then before you know it, you're going to be asked to meet up, and you're going to be asked to do these things in person, And depending on where you're coming from, this is going to be normalized and you're going to think there's nothing wrong with it, but then it's going to be too late because then the door has been opened and you're involved. Yeah, I have nothing good to say about OnlyFans or any other adult apps or anything like that promote this.
Thank you.
Yeah.
How do you push through the guilt even if you know that logically it wasn't your fault and that stuff that happened to you as a child just led you to being like the way you are right now and you're just trying to push through it?
Wait, tell me the beginning of your question.
So I'm just saying, how do you feel like how do you push through the guilt that you constantly feel sometimes, even if you've moved from that phase of your life?
Right, right. I don't have guilt. Right. I understand that. And that's like shame. Did you come in later too? Or were you here the whole time? Okay. I was thinking like just how shame and that keeps us sick and keeps us silent. Are you familiar with Brene Brown? Write that down and go Google her. Brene Brown. She has a TED Talk and she has one about shame. She's written, I think, even books about it. But it's such a great talk and realize of how to overcome that, because what was done to us, we don't have to carry. But that is what violence does, and especially sexual violence and trauma, what it does is puts that guilt and shame on us where it doesn't belong, right? And so how do I push through? I mean, when I figured out that I was a survivor and no longer a victim, that's when that lens changed. And I became empowered because I realized that what happened to me was a thing, right? Like that's a crime. That's actually a thing. I didn't choose it. It wasn't my fault that I was actually coerced and manipulated into it. And being around other survivors empowered me because then I didn't feel alone. And I felt like, wow, I'm not crazy, right? Like this happens and I'm not the only one. And just day after day, continuing to do that and fight through and seek good counsel and help from good, safe, supportive people in time, just time. It takes time and it takes intention and resilience, right? Yeah. You're welcome.
Thank you for such a powerful story. You actually opens my eyes widely in the subject area that I was not really knowing about. My question becomes, do you recommend any act or words that we can plant a small seed if we actually encounter with any of those women?
Non-judgmental, safe, supportive, kindness. That's really it. Just be there. Just be safe. Just be available. And when they don't exit the first 10 times, don't lose hope, right? It takes a long time. What do they say for domestic violence victims? It takes like an average of 7 times for a victim to finally leave. Trafficking is probably double that or more because of the bonds, of the exploitation, of the trauma. But if you can just be empowering and safe and kind and loving, that goes a long way. Yeah. And don't see them for their story, right? Know that there's so much more to that. Yeah. Yeah.
Another question? Okay.
Oh.
Hi, can you talk at all about work that's being done in terms of how to reduce demand for this? I mean, just feels like we focus a lot on the victims, but this whole idea of demand, when it goes past, typical, fairly normal, sexual interest to addiction and exploitation and things like that, just feels like we're expanding the realm rather than making it better.
Yeah, absolutely. There's great organizations that talk about porn, right? That's number one. How to not expose our kids to porn, giant, right? So when you hand your kid a cell phone, make sure they have the filters on them, number one thing, right? Because you don't want them accidentally watching and then getting addicted to porn. That's how you reduce demand, absolutely. But then once there is a demand, there's great organizations to interrupt demand. So demand abolition in Cambridge, I don't know if they're still headquartered in Cambridge, but they're a great organization that's doing work. And then there was one out of Oregon called A Bunch of Guys, or it was birthed out of another parent organization called the Epic Project. And these guys would get together, just regular guys volunteering, and they would post fake ads on the websites. And then when the buyers would call, they would answer the phone and then talk about the harms of the sex trade. Because really, you're going after the heart, right? These buyers need to have a heart change. They have John schools. I don't know if you've heard about that. When buyers get arrested for prostitution, they put them in John school. There's a few of them across the country. I know there's one in Maine, and they hear from real survivors and people who have been exploited and talk about the harms of the trade. Because you can arrest them, you can put their face up on a billboard and shame them and call the wife and stuff like that. That might temporarily work, but it's not going to fix the heart, right? It's not going to fix the addiction. They're buying people for their sexual pleasure because something's wrong in there. They're trying to obviously cover up something. They're hurt, and just like any other addiction. So John schools sometimes work, demand abolition, the Epic Project, interrupting that demand, and first of all, stopping it before it starts, which is limiting access to pornography. Yeah.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome. Thank you.
And her book is outside. I mean, you can go get it. Why don't we take a break, and then we'll come back, and Dr. Helps is going to do the next presentation. Thank you.